felt the ground shift beneath me. This couldn't be happening. Ladies and gentlemen, John's voice rang out, calm yet filled with intensity. There is something I must say. He looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow and something else, determination. I need to reveal the truth. Chapter 1. Family and Pressure. Being the youngest daughter in a once wealthy family isn't as glamorous as it sounds. Sure, there was a time when we had grand parties, expensive cars, and everything money could buy. But those days are long gone. Now, all that's left is a decaying mansion, hollow echoes of the past, and a family desperately clinging to what's slipping through their fingers. I try to help in any way I can, cooking, cleaning, anything to make life a little easier, but it never seems to matter. In their eyes, I'm just the plain, unremarkable daughter. You'll never be like Sophia, my mother often says, her voice cold and dismissive. She doesn't even try to hide her disappointment. Sophia is the star of our family. She's beautiful, with a face that can light up a room, and smart enough to charm anyone she meets. Everyone adores her, especially our parents. She's our only hope, they say, whenever the topic of our family's crumbling finances comes up. Me? I'm just there. I remember one night, I tried to join a conversation at the dinner table. My father, a man with a stern face and eyes that could pierce through stone, barely glanced at me. "Let the adults talk, dear," he said, waving me off as if I were a child. It stung, but I kept quiet. I'm used to it by now. Sophia, on the other hand, was the center of attention. She spoke about her plans, her accomplishments, and every word was met with admiration and pride. I sat there, forcing a smile, even as my heart ached. When my parents look at Sophia, they see salvation. When they look at me, they see a burden. The pressure on Sophia is enormous, but she handles it with grace, or at least that's what everyone thinks. When the family's finances started crumbling, they put all their hopes on her, and she delivered, in her own way. She got engaged to John, a wealthy heir from one of the most powerful families in the city. He's kind, generous, and completely smitten with her. I don't know how much of it is genuine and how much is an act, but I know why she did it. For Sophia, love and marriage are just tools to keep her status and to lift our family out of ruin. It's hard not to feel invisible next to her. Sophia's beauty and charm draw people in like moths to a flame, while I stand in the shadows. Our parents don't say it out loud, but I know they blame me for not being more like her. One afternoon, I overheard my mother talking to my father in hushed tones. "If only she had half of Sophia's looks and brains," she said, referring to me as if I weren't even a person. My father sighed, a heavy sound full of disappointment. "Sophia is our only chance," he replied. I left before I could hear more. I didn't need to. There's a part of me that admires Sophia. She's everything I'm not: confident, dazzling, and strong. But there's another part of me, a darker part, that resents her. It's not her fault that she's the family favorite, but sometimes I can't help but wish things were different. If I were smarter, prettier, more useful, maybe they would see me too. I was in the garden when I first heard about the engagement. Sophia came striding in, her smile wide and triumphant. "I'm getting married," she announced, her voice dripping with pride. Our parents rushed to congratulate her, showering her with praise. I stood at the edge of the crowd, clapping softly, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. John was their ticket back to wealth and power, and Sophia was their golden girl who made it happen. I didn't matter. I never did. But as I watched her bask in their approval, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. And deep down, I knew it would involve me in ways I couldn't yet understand. Chapter 2. The Accident and the Unmasking. The news hit like a punch to the gut. One minute, everything was fine, and the next, our world was flipped upside down. John had been in a car accident. I remember standing in the hallway when the phone rang. My mother answered, her face going pale as she listened. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling. Sophia and I exchanged a glance. For the first time in a long time there was fear in her eyes. Real, raw fear. We rushed to the hospital. The drive felt like it took forever. even though I knew we were speeding. I tried to speak, to ask questions, but nobody was in the mood for answers. Sophia stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. When we arrived, a doctor pulled us aside. John survived, he said, his tone serious. But he has a severe spinal injury. We don't know if he'll ever walk again. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. Sophia, however, was eerily quiet. At first, I thought she was in shock. But as the days passed, it became clear that her silence was something else entirely. The first few days, she tried. She'd visit John, sit by his bed, hold his hand. But her patience wore thin quickly. The longer John remained bedridden, the colder she became. One evening, I came to the hospital and saw Sophia sitting next to John, scrolling through her phone. He was trying to talk to her, his voice weak but hopeful. "Sophia, thank you for being here. I don't know what I'd do without you." She didn't even look up. "It's fine," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "You'll get better soon." But there was no warmth in her words, no love. After that, Sophia started making excuses. "I'm busy," she'd say. "Work is crazy." She'd come in, stay for 5 minutes, and leave. Eventually, she stopped coming altogether. I overheard her talking to our parents one night. "I can't waste my life like this," she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's a broken man. What use is he to me now?" I felt sick. How could she say that? How could she be so cruel? But nobody seemed surprised. This was Sophia, cold, calculating, selfish. It was just that none of us wanted to see it before. I started visiting John more often. At first, I wasn't sure if he even noticed. He barely spoke, barely ate. The spark in his eyes was gone, but I couldn't bear to see him like that. He didn't deserve to be abandoned, not like this. So, I sat by his bed and talked. I read him stories, told him about the little things happening outside the hospital walls. Slowly, he began to respond. He'd ask questions, share memories, even laugh sometimes, though it was a fragile, broken sound. One afternoon, as I was fluffing his pillow, he looked at me and said, "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." I paused, my heart aching at the pain in his voice. "I don't need to owe you anything, John," I replied softly. "You don't deserve to be alone." The more time I spent with John, the more I saw the man he truly was, kind, resilient, trying so hard to keep going, even when everything felt hopeless. I couldn't understand how Sophia could throw him away so easily. But then, Sophia never cared about people. She cared about power, money, status. When John was healthy and wealthy, he was perfect for her. But now, he was just an inconvenience. One day, Sophia came to the hospital, not for John, but to meet someone else. Lucas, John's best friend. Lucas was tall, confident, and carried himself with an air of effortless charm. Sophia's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. I watched from a distance, feeling a pit form in my stomach. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm, leaned in closer than necessary. It was painfully obvious what she was doing. Lucas, being polite, didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. I wanted to scream, to shake her and ask how she could be so heartless. But I didn't. I knew it wouldn't change anything. Over the next few days, Sophia's visits to the hospital had nothing to do with John. She'd dress up, put on makeup, and accidentally bump into Lucas. I saw the way she looked at him, like he was her new prize. In her eyes, John was already forgotten. I felt ashamed to call her my sister, but I kept visiting John. I'd sit by his side, even when he was asleep, just to make sure he wasn't alone. Because I couldn't be like Sophia. I wouldn't be like her. The more I saw her true colors, the more determined I became to be different. I didn't know what the future held for John, or for me. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let him face it alone. Chapter 3. Family Pressure and the Proposal. Sophia didn't waste any time. As soon as she set her sights on Lucas, John became a forgotten chapter in her life. She stopped visiting the hospital altogether. I'd ask her about it, hoping, maybe foolishly, that she'd show a sliver of guilt. "I'm busy," she'd snap, rolling her eyes. "John has you, doesn't he?" The words stung, not because they were dismissive, but because they were true. I was there, day in and day out, while she was out with Lucas, dressing in her finest clothes and playing the part of the charming socialite. Lucas seemed to enjoy the attention at first. They'd laugh, exchange smiles that looked too practiced. I knew it was all a game for Sophia, a chance to secure a better opportunity, now that John was, in her eyes, damaged goods. It made me sick, but I was used to swallowing my words. Then one night, everything changed. I was sitting at the dinner table, poking at my cold food, when my parents summoned me. I could feel it in the air, heavy, tense, like the calm before a storm. "Sit down," my father said, his tone brooking no argument. I obeyed, heart pounding. "Your sister has important things to focus on now," my mother began, her eyes avoiding mine. "The family's reputation is at stake." My stomach twisted. I knew where this was going. "She's moved on," my father cut in, his voice cold. "And John, he still needs someone. He needs stability, support. It's best for everyone if you take over where Sophia left off." I stared at them, the words sinking in slowly. "Take over?" I echoed, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. "You want me to marry John?" "It's not about what you want," my mother snapped, her patience clearly worn thin. "This is about the family, about survival. If you care about this family at all, you'll do what needs to be done." I wanted to scream, to tell them how cruel, how wrong this was, but the words caught in my throat. It was always like this. Sophia was the star, the one they protected and cherished. I was the tool, expected to step in whenever she didn't want to dirty her hands. They didn't care about me, or what this would do to me. They cared about money, about status. And if marrying John, a broken man, would keep us afloat, they'd throw me into the fire without a second thought. I left the table, my hands trembling. I spent the rest of the night pacing my room, torn apart by emotions I couldn't name. Marrying John wasn't what I wanted. I cared for him, yes, but I didn't love him. Not like that. This wasn't a fairy tale where feelings magically fell into place. He was hurt, vulnerable, and the thought of stepping into my sister's shoes felt wrong on so many levels. The next day, I visited John at the hospital, my mind still reeling. I couldn't look him in the eyes without feeling the weight of my parents' words crushing me. "You're quiet today," he said softly, noticing my troubled expression. I forced a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. How could I tell him that I was being pushed to marry him like some pawn in a twisted game of survival? How could I tell him that I was supposed to become his fiancé, not out of love, but out of duty? When I returned home that night, Sophia was there, lounging in luxury as if she hadn't a care in the world. She saw me and smirked. "So, have they convinced you yet?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. "It's the least you can do. You know?" I couldn't hold back anymore. "How can you be so heartless?" I demanded. "He loved you." She rolled her eyes. "Love doesn't matter. Not when you're stuck with a cripple. Grow up." I wanted to hate her, but it was hard to find the energy when I was drowning in despair. My parents kept pressuring me every day. "The family needs you," they said over and over, like a mantra designed to break me. I felt trapped. No one asked what I wanted. No one cared. I spent countless sleepless nights thinking about it. About John, about myself, about what it meant to be sacrificed for a family that didn't even love me the way they loved Sophia. I didn't want to marry him out of pity. I didn't want to be someone's second choice. But every time I thought of John lying alone in that hospital bed, my heart ached. He didn't deserve to be abandoned again. Even if I couldn't love him the way a wife should, I could at least be there for him. I could try. So one day, with tears streaming down my face, I whispered the words I knew would seal my fate. "I'll do it." Chapter 4. Acceptance and Sacrifice. When I told my parents I would marry John, the weight of their expectations felt like a boulder on my chest. They nodded, satisfied that the problem was solved, and turned their attention to other matters. Sophia, on the other hand, couldn't hide her glee. "Good," she said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "At least you're useful for something." She didn't care that she was leaving John behind. She only cared that her path was clear, clear to chase after Lucas, and chase she did. Sophia was relentless. Every day she made sure to accidentally run into Lucas, wearing her finest dresses and flashing her most charming smile. I saw them together once at a cafe when I was on my way to the hospital. They were laughing, leaning in close, as if the world revolved around them. My chest tightened. Lucas played along, his eyes warm, his words soft. Sophia was convinced that she'd secured her next victory. A rich, powerful man who would make her forget all about John. I wanted to believe she'd find happiness, but deep down, I knew better. Everything with her was a transaction, a means to an end. Meanwhile, my life took a different turn. Every day, I was at John's side. I helped him with his physical therapy, brought him food, and kept him company during those long, quiet hours. At first, he was withdrawn, barely speaking. It was understandable. His world had crumbled, but slowly, something shifted. He started asking questions, telling stories, and even laughing again, though it was still tinged with pain. One afternoon, as I adjusted his wheelchair, our hands brushed. It was a small thing, a fleeting touch, but I felt a spark run through me. I quickly pulled away, embarrassed, but he noticed. He glanced at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a second, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. We moved on as if it hadn't happened, but I couldn't forget the warmth of his touch. There were other moments too, like the time I was helping him stretch during therapy. I leaned in to support his back, and our faces ended up inches apart. I could see every detail of his eyes, the way they softened, the hint of a smile on his lips. My heart pounded, and I quickly looked away, feeling my cheeks burn. I told myself it was nothing, just an accident. But it kept happening. Little things. The way our conversations grew deeper, the way he'd smile at me, not just out of gratitude, but with something more. And the way I found myself wanting to make him smile, no matter what it took. One evening, I brought him a homemade meal. I can't promise it's as good as restaurant food, I joked, placing the plate on the tray in front of him. He looked at me with such genuine gratitude that I had to fight back tears. "It's perfect," he said quietly. As he ate, he told me about his childhood, stories he'd never shared with Sophia. I listened intently, hanging on to every word. When he finished, he looked at me, a soft expression on his face. "You make this bearable," he admitted. "I don't know how, but you do." His words stayed with me long after I left the hospital. I kept telling myself that this wasn't love, that I was just doing my duty. But deep down, I knew better. My feelings for John were changing, whether I wanted them to or not. I couldn't control the way my heart raced when he smiled, or how my chest ached when I saw him struggle. I was falling for him, and it terrified me. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. I was meant to be the replacement fiancé, the dutiful one who stepped in when Sophia walked away. But it wasn't duty keeping me by his side anymore. It was him. It was us. And that scared me more than anything else. Because love, real love, was dangerous. It left you exposed, vulnerable. And I wasn't sure I could survive another heartbreak. But I couldn't walk away either. So I stayed, hoping that whatever we were building between us was strong enough to withstand the storm. Chapter 5. Growing Bonds and New Beginnings. The weeks turned into months, and the hospital visits became the rhythm of my life. Each day, I spent hours with John, helping him regain strength, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing. It was slow, sometimes painful progress, but every small victory was worth celebrating. When he managed to move his legs a few inches, I cheered so loudly that the nurses had to shush me. John laughed. A real, genuine laugh that made my heart feel light for the first time in what seemed like forever. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when our bond shifted from companionship to something deeper. Maybe it was the quiet evenings when we'd sit side by side, watching the sunset through his hospital window, the orange glow casting soft shadows on his face. Or maybe it was the way he started opening up about his fears, how he felt trapped, broken, and terrified of what lay ahead. I'd listen, holding his hand, reassuring him that he wasn't alone. One day, we were in the park just outside the hospital, a rare break from the sterile walls. I had pushed his wheelchair along the winding paths, and we stopped under a tree. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, everything was peaceful. You know, he said, looking up at the sky. I used to think my life was over, that I'd be nothing more than a burden. I knelt beside him, placing my hand over his. You're not a burden, I whispered, my voice steady but my heart pounding. You never were. He turned to me, his gaze intense. It's because of you, he said softly. You made me believe there's still something to fight for. I couldn't breathe. The air between us felt charged, like the world had paused just for this moment. Slowly, he reached out, and I met him halfway. When our lips touched, it was gentle at first, hesitant, as if we were both afraid of breaking whatever fragile thing had grown between us. But then it deepened, and all the uncertainty melted away. It was just us, raw and real, with no past to haunt us, and no future to worry about. In that moment, I knew I'd do anything to protect this love. Afterward, things changed, but in the best way. We were no longer just patient and caregiver. We were partners, facing whatever came next together. John's progress continued, slow but steady. We talked about dreams, about the life we wanted to build. He still had his dark days, moments when the weight of everything threatened to crush him, but I was there, and he knew he wasn't alone. One evening, as we sat together in the small hospital garden, John took my hands in his. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've given me back my hope, my life, and I don't want to face any of it without you. He slipped a simple ring onto my finger. Will you marry me? Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. Yes, I whispered. 1,000 times yes. But life, as always, had a way of complicating things. Just as our love story was beginning, Sophia's relationship with Lucas reached a fever pitch. They were inseparable, fiery, passionate, like a flame that burned too hot. I heard whispers of their grand nights out, the way they lit up every room they entered. To everyone else, they seemed perfect together. Then came the day they announced their engagement. Sophia made a show of it, of course, dressed in an extravagant gown, sparkling with jewels. Lucas proposed in front of a crowd, and she accepted with a laugh that was both triumphant and cruel. We've always belonged together, she declared, casting a glance in John's direction. There was something in her eyes, defiance maybe, or victory. John remained calm, though I saw the tension in his jaw. Congratulations, he said, his voice steady. If that's what you both want, I wish you happiness. It was a clean break. No lingering bitterness, no grudges. Just an end to one chapter and the start of another. But I couldn't help feeling like it wasn't the end of Sophia's scheming. The way she looked at me, the way her lips curled when she thought no one was watching, it made me uneasy, but I pushed it aside. For now, all that mattered was the man beside me and the promise of a future we'd build together. Chapter 6. The Wedding Day and the Unveiling of Truth. The wedding day was a spectacle. 2 couples, 1 grand event. It was the kind of lavish affair that everyone in town would talk about for months, maybe years. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked down the aisle, arm in arm with John. He looked at me with those steady, reassuring eyes, and for a moment, the chaos of my life felt bearable. Sophia, as expected, made a dramatic entrance with Lucas. She wore a gown that sparkled like a million stars, basking in the attention she craved. Lucas stood beside her, playing the part of the wealthy groom-to-be with practiced ease. The ceremony began. Vows were exchanged, promises spoken. I felt the weight of every word as John slipped a ring onto my finger. I loved him, I truly did, but I never expected what happened next. As the officiant prepared to pronounce us husband and wife, John took a deep breath and stepped back. The crowd murmured, confusion rippling through the guests. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up, completely, without any sign of weakness. Gasps echoed around the room. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This couldn't be happening. Ladies and gentlemen, John's voice rang out, calm yet filled with intensity. There is something I must say. He looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow and something else, determination. I need to reveal the truth. He turned to the crowd. My injury was a lie. I am not paralyzed. This entire time, I've been testing the loyalty and love of those closest to me. You see, I needed to know if I was valued for who I am, or for my money. The room was deadly silent. And Sophia, he said, turning to my sister, you failed. Sophia's face went pale, her hands clenched at her sides. What? What are you saying? She demanded, her voice shaking. This is some kind of sick joke, right? John shook his head. I'm afraid not. He gestured to Lucas, who stepped forward, a sheepish expression on his face. Lucas isn't who you think he is. He's not a wealthy man. He's a struggling actor, one I hired to see how far your greed would go. Sophia's mouth dropped open. She turned to Lucas, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Tell me this isn't true, she whispered, desperation lacing her voice. Tell me you're not just some actor. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. It's true. I'm sorry, Sophia. He swallowed hard. But I wasn't pretending about everything. I actually did fall for you. Her expression twisted, rage overtaking her features. You fell for me? She spat, her voice venomous. Do you think I care about that? How much money do you even have in your account, huh? She laughed bitterly, her face contorting with disgust. I wasted my time on a pathetic nobody. Lucas flinched, hurt flashing across his face, but he said nothing. The guests watched in stunned silence as Sophia's fury turned to humiliation. She pushed past him, stumbling slightly in her extravagant dress. I will not stand here and be humiliated like this, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. Then she stormed out, leaving a wake of stunned murmurs behind her. I wanted to feel pity for her, but I couldn't. Not after everything. The room was still reeling when John turned to me. He took my hands, his grip warm and steady. I'm sorry for all the lies, he said softly. But the one thing I've never lied about is how I feel about you. You've shown me what true loyalty and love are. Thank you for staying by my side when I didn't deserve it. My chest ached with emotion, but before I could respond, my parents stepped forward. My mother's eyes were cold, her mouth set in a thin line. You, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You've ruined everything. You stole what was meant for your sister. You're nothing but a disgrace. I felt the sting of her words, but this time, I couldn't stay silent. I've done everything you asked, I said, my voice trembling but strong. I've sacrificed my happiness, my life, everything, for this family. And all you ever did was use me, ignore me, treat me like I was worthless. Well, no more. I won't be a tool for you. I won't use John's wealth to save you from the mess you created. The slap came out of nowhere. My mother's hand connected with my cheek, the sharp sting bringing tears to my eyes. Gasps echoed around the room. John stepped in front of me instantly, shielding me from her. That's enough, he said, his voice deadly calm. You will not touch her again. The tension was suffocating. My parents' faces were masks of rage and disbelief. The wedding was in chaos, guests whispering, judgmental eyes everywhere. John took my hand, his grip firm and unyielding. Let's go, he said quietly. I nodded. We turned and walked away from the ruins of what should have been a happy day, leaving behind the shattered pieces of my family, and a past I was finally ready to let go of. Chapter 7. A grand celebration and a new beginning. A few weeks later, John and I stood beneath a stunning archway adorned with flowers, surrounded by hundreds of guests. This time, the celebration was ours alone. A grand wedding filled with music, laughter, and joy. Light danced off crystal chandeliers, and every table was a testament to the love and hard work poured into this day. As I walked down the aisle, I met John's gaze. His eyes were full of warmth and pride. When I reached him, he took my hands, and all the noise around us faded. I love you, he whispered, his voice steady and sure. We exchanged vows, speaking words of love and promise. You showed me what true loyalty is, John said. Today we begin again, honestly, wholeheartedly. I felt tears slip down my cheeks as I replied, you are my home, my strength, my heart. The guests cheered as we kissed. A perfect sweet moment. The rest of the night was a blur of dancing, smiles, and endless toasts. Surrounded by those who mattered, we stepped into our new life. This was more than just a wedding. It was a promise of a future built on love, trust, and resilience. As we held each other close, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our story was only just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly hopeful.